My name is Peter Davison, and I'm a writer, cultural commentator and musicologist based in the northwest of England. I'm presenting a series of podcasts in which I will read instalments of an essay about the relevance of the life and work of Gustav Mahler in our own times. I wrote it originally for the Mahler in Manchester festival, which took place at the Bridgewater Hall in 2010. I'm delighted to have been asked to revive and re-edit this piece of writing for the 2020 Colorado MahlerFest, which, like so many other musical events, has had to retreat to the virtual world of cyberspace. Here is the third and final instalment of Mahler in Our Own Times, written and read by me, Peter Davison. Mahler's significance for contemporary culture. Mahler's influence as a composer was split between the two camps of 20th century music. There were the progressive atonalists led by Schoenberg, and there were the more conservative figures who continued to write tonal music, such as Zemlinsky, Franz Schmidt and Erich Korngold. Schoenberg and his followers claimed Mahler as an anti-establishment figure protesting against a corrupt culture. His bold and fragmented orchestration, his dense musical thought and dissonant harmony were interpreted as evidence of the gradual dissolution of the old tonal music. Berg and Webern were devoted to Mahler as the unofficial patron of their second Viennese school. Berg especially was temperamentally close to Mahler, and his music retains Mahler's lyricism and expressive candour. But, in truth, after Mahler the Viennese symphonic tradition was largely spent, and the genre only thrived away from its first great centre. Beyond Vienna, the symphony remained an aspiration for any composer trying to prove their credentials on the international stage. Sibelius, Nielsen and Elgar were prime examples, although none of them owed anything directly to Mahler. Yet Mahler could still provide a model for those who wished to transgress musical boundaries while bowing discreetly to a living symphonic tradition. The Russian symphonist Dmitri Shostakovich found in Mahler's narrative forms a basis for his own epic style, developing a language which combined expressionist intensity and bitter irony. He amplified Mahler's sense of alienation from the collective, portraying the existential agony of the individual trapped in an authoritarian society. But Shostakovich lacks any transcendence, treading close to the nihilism which Mahler tried so hard to avoid. The American, Leonard Bernstein, another Jewish composer-conductor of great charisma, wrote symphonies in a style that, like Mahler, mixed the popular and the classical. He was one of the finest of all Mahler conductors. Benjamin Britten also admired Mahler for his craftsmanship and formal innovations. In his Sinfonia da Requiem, the Spring Symphony, and even in the opera Peter Grimes, Mahler's influence can clearly be heard. Mahler was also a source of fascination to those composers after 1945 who wanted to engage politically on the left, such as the symphonist Hans Werner Henze and the more avant-garde Luciano Berio. Berio's Sinfonia adds further layers of Mahlerian self-awareness to the chattering ironies of the scherzo from the Resurrection Symphony, using electronics, montage techniques and superimposed vocalizations. Even an arch experimenter like Stockhausen seized upon Mahler's interdependency of life and work and took it to a new extreme. In the contemporary world, such figures are lauded and rarely treated as the outcasts which they aspired to become. Mahler provides a template for artists who are fierce critics of the status quo, yet remain embedded in the cultural establishment. Mahler's impact on wider culture has been less obviously extensive, despite the parallels drawn by Times music critic William Mann in 1963 with the song by Lennon and McCartney. However, Mahler's ability to encompass popular genres within the framework of the classical symphony may have encouraged those musicians developing progressive rock music to integrate aspects of classical music and orchestral instrumentation into their work. Mahler has had more influence upon film music. A flock of musically gifted immigrants, including Max Steiner and Erich Korngold, fled Central Europe for the USA before the Second World War and brought with them the musical language of late Romanticism. The colours of the Mahlerian orchestral palette, His grand expressive gestures and episodic montages were soon heard on the soundtracks of countless Hollywood films from the 1930s onwards. More recently, Ken Russell's Mahler of 1974 used extracts from the symphonies in a scurrilous fantasy, encouraging the view that the composer was a morbid neurotic. It is a largely dated, surrealistic satire, though the image of Cosima Wagner dressed as a Nazi Valkyrie making Mahler eat a raw pig cannot easily be forgotten. Mahler provides an archetypal image for a nutty professor, an intense, gawky intellectual with wild hair and little round glasses. This seems incompatible with his undoubted attractiveness to women, his life as a family man, and his passion for outdoor activities. So where has the distorted image come from? It is a caricature partly inspired by his wife's rather one-sided reminiscences, portraying him as egocentric and insensitive. It is an image further fueled by the many hostile and anti-Semitic critics of Mahler's day. The pattern was continued, even inadvertently. The author Thomas Mann revered Mahler as one of the most creative minds of his age. In his tale of fatal infatuation, Death in Venice, written just after the composer's death, Mann modelled the appearance of his main character, the world-weary writer Gustav von Aschenbach, on Mahler. In 1971, when the Italian director Luchino Visconti made a film of the novella, he seized upon the Mahlerian associations, turning von Aschenbach into a composer and using Mahler's music for the soundtrack. The success of the movie transformed the Fifth Symphony's Adagietto into a piece of popular super kitsch associated with the sunlight on the Venetian lagoon and the gyrations of an androgynous youth. While this produced a sumptuous cinematic experience, it did Mahler no favours by suggesting he was at heart a decadent. The distortion continued in Willie Russell's Educating Rita of 1983, where Maureen Lipman plays Trish, an intellectual who lives for art rather than real life. She indulges an obsessive passion for the Sixth Symphony before attempting suicide. Mahler is represented as synonymous with destructive neurosis, yet had Trish listened to the Rückert songs, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Similarly, in Woody Allen's film Husbands and Wives of 1992, which is about two dysfunctional married couples, the Ninth Symphony is heard at a concert, scene of an anxious date. Afterwards, the couple exchanges banal comments about the work's demanding length. Mahler is a badge of cultural sophistication as the two lovers try to impress each other. Allen implies that Mahler's long-winded theatricality predicts the likely course of their liaison. The cliché of Mahler's neurosis has long been overstated and neglects the richness of his personality. His music reveals its depth only to those who can face themselves. Otherwise, its length is all there is to talk about. In our own times, many composers claim Mahler as a source of inspiration, and his influence is proving seminal, precisely because he felt both affection and antagonism towards his audience. This suggests dialogue rather than the hostility and fear which have been the norm in the post-war period. Mahler's growing popularity has helped to rescue musical culture from a serious falling out, an ideological dispute which allowed power politics to infect musical life and which alienated the mainstream public from new music. With some healing of the rift between tonal and atonal composers, Mahler has become a model for any composer who wants to address an audience, but has no wish to pander directly to popular taste. Chief among them is the Austrian composer Kurt Schwetzig, who first resisted the onslaught of extreme modernism before identifying with socialist politics and environmentalism. His music has many Viennese fingerprints, being heterogeneous, expressively tonal, and wittily neoclassical. His colleague from the so-called Third Viennese School, H.K. Gruber, has also created music with surrealistic humour that seemingly grows out of Mahlerian irony and which sometimes employs a kind of cabaret style. Both composers are indebted to Kurt Weill, the musical collaborator of the left-wing playwright Bertolt Brecht. Weill successfully blended popular and classical idioms, but avoided Mahler's titanic ambition. There are few serious and successful composers of classical music today who would not acknowledge the importance of Mahler as a figure straddling many opposing aesthetic stances. He can be many things to many people, but he represents a fine example for any artist who aspires to a high level of technical accomplishment and intellectual thoroughness, regardless of musical idiom or tradition. In the music of Philip Sawyers, a contemporary British composer, the influence of Mahler is profoundly felt. The symphony continues in his hands to be a vast psychological landscape where spiritual and emotional conflicts can be resolved, where thematic opposites can find synthesis. The music of another dedicated Mahlerian, David Matthews, also encompasses a wide emotional range. His 9 symphonies have the sweep of a grand musical journey that is also a personal pilgrimage, one which follows the same kind of path towards spiritual and creative maturity as that laid out by Mahler. Mahler and us. If an average listener feels intimidated that, without a deep knowledge of 19th century history, philosophy and music, they cannot appreciate Mahler's music, this would be wrong. His music expresses itself with great eloquence and visceral immediacy. When Mahler is being ironical, we can hear it easily enough. His subtler ambiguities are perhaps harder to grasp, and we can be confused by them, but this should not prevent the music from gripping us. Mahler's music works at many levels, and the power of his distinctive voice can carry us through. His symphonic works strive for cohesion and emotional resolution, and that struggle for meaning and finality persists, even if we cannot follow every detail, and even if we are, in the end, left with a question mark. Mahler's excesses, his extravagant rhetoric and willful persistence can be sources of irritation, but the energy and conviction of his music, its range of expression, from intimate confession to public celebration, mean that listening is always memorable and moving. The music feels real to us, precisely because it is not pure and abstract, but depicts how a real modern person constructs their identity and finds meaning from the complex stream of their perceptions, thoughts and memories. Mahler lived out the conflict between rational idealism, the fruit of the Enlightenment, and a longing for true nature, the call of the romantic spirit. It is a conflict we experience vividly today as ancient landscapes are destroyed in pursuit of economic development. The human struggle for survival has been greatly enhanced by science and technology, but it must be balanced with a respect for nature, which grows out of a sense of its spiritual value. Mahler articulates this truth with a relevance which cries out to us. At a moment in history when we appear to have become obsessed with theory, system and process, Mahler's music is refreshingly difficult to categorize. Today, for composers and the public, the orthodoxies of modernism or the anarchy of postmodernism seem to be the only choices on offer. This seems an unsatisfactory situation, an all or nothing scenario. Mahler offers a way out of this impasse. His great achievement is to retain contact with the mainstream music-loving public, even if at times he can barely conceal his hostility towards them, or is tempted to have a joke at their expense. But this represents a much more positive relationship between the individual and the collective. The channels of communication are open, the tension is creative, ambivalence does not lead to alienation. It is therefore not surprising that audiences of today respond to Mahler's doubt-ridden truth-seeking with enthusiasm, while they dismiss the specious orthodoxies of many other contemporary cultural movements. Mahler's relevance to those currently involved in creative endeavour rests upon his integrity, which allowed him to transcend the collapsing values of his time. He questioned orthodoxy, but did not dismiss it. He stripped conventions bare to rediscover unchanging universal truths buried in the confusion of a godless age. Mahler is now accepted as part of our musical culture. He is the archetypal God-seeker, struggling to hold on to spiritual values in a materialistic age. In his music, there is nostalgia for a lost paradise, presented to us as a fairy tale world, or the golden age of the Viennese classical symphony, or some idyllic representation of nature. But there is also an apocalyptic sensibility, the rhetoric of a prophet who warns the world of impending doom. Mahler expresses the intimacy and inwardness of a man at prayer, alternately praising the God of beauty and angrily questioning his inexplicable cruelty. In Mahler, doubt must always be overcome, an opposing force which manifests itself in anxiety and the probing skepticism of a highly developed intellect. But he set thinking aside and learned to accept fate by stilling his restless ego. If we want to understand Mahler, we must not confine him to a particular cultural movement. He was too much of a dreamer to be a modernist, too self-aware to be a romantic, just as he was too subjective to be a classicist and too rooted in tradition to be a postmodernist. He defies explanation in such terms. Mahler is more of an Orpheus for the modern age, seeking to rescue Eurydice from the underworld, to save the soul of man from the darkness of rational materialism and the relentless forward tread of modernity. He clung to what he always felt, but struggled to believe, that a composer should sing with the voice of true nature. From the stark witness of the bone flute in Das Klagen der Lied to his expression of enduring love at the close of the 10th Symphony, Mahler gave voice to his muse. For him, music was a miraculous gift. As he wrote in Das Klagen der Lied, "It is a song so beautiful that whoever hears it may wish to die." Mahler's life was devoted to the pursuit of such beauty, and his struggle for meaning is also clearly our own. He shows us the limitations of a restless, technologically advanced patriarchal culture and, at the same time, reassures us because he ultimately found timeless truths hidden beneath modernity's unyielding veneer. Mahler has thus given us something of immeasurable worth, for his music envisions an age of Eros, when the feminine qualities of compassion and healing may yet release us from our spiritual confusion. That concludes the third and final installment of my essay, Mahler in Our Own Times, read by me, Peter Davison. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Thank you for listening.